Very little happening, by the way. There's an over-the-middle throw for Fields. Wow. And the Brits are wondering what is happening in London. And so are the American announcers.
To all the people in England, I am so sorry. Our games are usually a lot better than this. The end of the first half of this game was an atrocity. As a matter of fact, this entire game was an atrocity. But this moment in particular from Aaron Glenn was awful. And you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Aaron Glenn's wishy-washiness is one of the primary reasons why the Jets are 0-6. The man cannot coach. He cannot make up his mind on anything. Now, at the end of the first half, he didn't know whether to be aggressive or be conservative, and he seemed to change his mind on every single play of the drive. So what if I said that his coaching actually got worse? What if I said that somehow the ending of the first half wasn't the only international crime against eyeballs and international crime against common sense that he committed? Because one of the craziest things that coaches seemingly have no idea how to manage, especially new coaches, is timeouts, and when to use them and when to not use them, when to hold them and when to fold them, when to walk away and run up to the officials. And if that was a test, then holy cow, Aaron Glenn just failed that test miserably.
Fields steps up, reaches for the first down line, but he's ruled a yard shy.
4th down and short. Don't know if the Jets are going to go for it here or not. You could try and get him with a hard count and then take the delay of game. You could be aggressive and go for it and keep the drive alive with a quarterback sneak or a Breece Hall run or something like that. Whatever you do here, just don't call a timeout. Just don't call a timeout. Just don't call a time.
There's a stoppage on the field right now. The Jets call timeout.
Good job, Coach Glenn. Just wasted that valuable timeout in a 1-point game that you'll probably need later on. Just a hunch. That's one of the most wasteful timeouts I've seen all season. But if you're going to go for it, I get it. If you're going for it and you want to make sure your offense is on the same page before a pivotal play, I'm not going to fault you too much for it. Obviously, this is a huge 4th down play. If you don't get it, the Broncos are starting in field goal range with an easy chance to take the lead. So you don't want to rush this. Maybe I'm being too hard on you, and maybe my criticism isn't fair. So, okay, you've got your offense settled down and on the same page. You've got 4th and short, and you just call the timeout so everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing here. Time to see what you've drawn up.
6th punt, 12th punt of the game, 6 for each team. And that's a high one. Mims with a fair catch.
Or not, wasting a timeout to punt the ball away. Welcome to dumb decisions. Before we break down what happened here, this whole series is about taking an in-depth look at decisions made during games that were clearly awful from the start. This isn't something to look bad in hindsight. Rather, this is something to look awful almost immediately. These are moves where gut instinct tells you right away that there is no way this can possibly work. And sure enough, your gut instinct was smarter than that of an NFL head coach. And for this one, we're taking a look at the mind of New York Jets head coach Aaron Glenn. That's right, folks, double feature. He was so bad across the pond that he's on here twice in one game. There's a reason that the Jets are the worst team in football. And with Brian Callahan, unfortunately, no longer employed by the Tennessee Titans, even though we're only 6 games into his coaching career, there's a new clear-cut winner in the clubhouse for the worst coach in football. There are some guys that you just know are going to be gold mines for some of the dumbest things you'll ever see on a football field just a couple of games into their career. You knew very early on that Nathaniel Hackett was going to give you tons of content on a weekly basis. You knew very early on that Frank Reich with the Panthers was going to give you tons of content on a weekly basis. And Aaron Glenn is in that tier. I know it's a 5-year contract for Glenn with the Jets, but I'm not sure how much longer he's got and whether he even survives year 1. So we're just going to savor the stupidity while we can, because it truly is a sight to behold. So with that being said, let's take a look at why calling a timeout in the fourth quarter of a 1-point game in order to punt the ball away is a really bad idea. Timeouts are extremely valuable currency. Too many coaches have no idea when to call a timeout and how to do it, especially when we're talking about the 2-minute warning and using that as a fourth timeout versus using that as a crutch. But if the game is close like this, it's on the plus side of the 2-minute warning, and you're on offense, there is only one reason, literally one reason, why you should call a timeout when you're on that side of the ball, assuming there are no injuries whatsoever. That reason is to avoid a penalty. And even with that, depending on where you are on the field and what the down and distance is, it's usually worth it to take the 5 yards versus burning what is a 40-second aid for you. If you're calling a timeout to avoid a delay game on 3rd and 1, that's more acceptable than doing so to avoid a delay game of 3rd and 13. Likewise, if you're calling a timeout to avoid getting called for a penalty that would push you out of field goal range or would push you back 5 yards from the goal line to the 6, that's different than calling it to avoid getting pushed back from your own 23-yard line on 3rd and 11 versus the 18-yard line on 3rd and 16. Like anything in life, it's based on the circumstance. However, that is the only reason when you are on offense to call a timeout in a close game in the fourth quarter on the plus side of the 2-minute warning. On defense, yeah, there are plenty of reasons to call it. Your defense is all out of sorts. You're trying to stop the clock because your opponent is trying to run it down. The other offense is going quick, and you don't have your personnel in the game. But on offense, when you have the ball, you really don't want to have to burn a timeout in the second half unless it is absolutely 100% positively necessary. Which raises the obvious question. Was this necessary? You're calling a timeout on 4th down to punt the ball away? Don't get me wrong, I'm fine punting the ball. I would have done the same thing. Your defense has played well. And if you don't get the first down, the Broncos are already starting in field goal range. That is not the issue here. I'm fine with the punt. But the timeout, using that valuable real estate to do that and just give the ball back to the opposing team? Let's weigh the pros and cons of calling a timeout versus not calling a timeout. The pro of calling a timeout is that you don't lose any yardage. You're kicking it at the 30. You've been averaging roughly 50 yards per punt on the day. So let's just say you kick it at your average of 50. I know in real life, the punt went 44 yards, but you had no way of knowing exactly how far to go beforehand, as while you can estimate, you can't know exactly for obvious reasons. If you punt it 50 yards, the Broncos are getting it at their own 20-yard line. Compare that to not calling a timeout and taking a delay of game penalty, and now, with that same fact pattern, the Broncos are getting it at their own 25-yard line. I don't know about you, but that's not a big difference at all. Obviously, you'd rather have the Broncos start at the 20 versus the 25, and no one's denying otherwise. You want the Broncos to start further back a field goal range and your end zone than closer. Duh. And there are times where those 5 yards of field position matter in a big way. This is not one of them, or at the very least, not compared to calling a timeout. If the Broncos start at the 20 because you called the timeout, they need to drive about 45 yards to get into field goal range, meaning that they need 4 first downs. If the Broncos start at the 25 because you didn't call a timeout, they need to drive about 40 yards to get into field goal range, meaning that they need, you guessed it, 4 first downs. They still need to go a long way either way. They still need to have a sustained drive either way, unless you allow a crazy long play. So yes, while there is a difference between the Broncos starting at the 25 versus starting at the 20, in this particular instance, it's like the difference between going to a concert and sitting in the 8th row versus sitting in the 9th row. We're not talking about nosebleeds versus floor seats. We're talking about an extremely minimal, barely noticeable difference that has no material impact on the experience. But now, imagine in that concert example that the 8th row costs $400 and the 9th row costs $80. You'd be crazy to move up one row for a price difference that substantial. Yet, that's what Aaron Glenn did here. Because now, let's look at what happens if you take the timeout and the con of that. It's obvious, right? You have one less chance to stop the clock. If the Broncos score and you need to get it back, you're going to have 40 fewer seconds to work with. If the Broncos have it inside the 2-minute warning, you might have just lost the game. If you're driving late and want to go over the middle of the field or have extra plays to work with, you might not be able to do that. And you're going to call the timeout here, not because you want to go for it, but because you willingly are going to change possessions? Like I said, it might be a bit different if you call the timeout and then went for it. But the best case scenario from calling a timeout is that you give the ball back to the Broncos with 5 yards of field position, but without the more important thing, which is the timeout in your back pocket to stop the clock and potentially save the game. Nothing material changes in your favor by calling the timeout here is what I'm getting at. There is no material difference here whatsoever. And the only one who seemed to think otherwise was Aaron Glenn, which is kind of a problem when he's, the head coach of the football team and should know better. Now, you might be saying, maybe the Jets weren't sure about the spot and were waiting for replay assists to come and save them, because it was close enough that it could have been a first down. However, there are 2 problems with that theory. Number 1, the Jets still had both of their challenges left. If that was the issue, why not just throw the challenge flag? Best case, you get the first down. Worst case, you lose a timeout, which, what do you know, is literally the exact same thing that you ended up doing. But number 2, Aaron Glenn talked after the game about the decision to take a timeout in that spot, and he never subscribed to that theory. This is what Glenn had to say about the decision to call a timeout and then punt the ball away on 4th down. Take a listen.
Well, one other strategic question.
Yep.
Before you took a timeout on the 4th and 1, right before you punted there,
Say it again.
Why you took the timeout there on the 4th and 1 when you punted?
Oh, on the one, I think we were at like the 30.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it was close to that.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I was thinking about, man, let's be aggressive. Let's get ready to go. So I wanted to actually talk to John Berger about it. And we both said, man, it's probably better to punt in this situation.
You see why Glenn is in over his head, right? You see why this man isn't cut out for the job, right? This is a man who had no idea what he was doing or what his philosophy was. If he actually had a game plan, he wouldn't have called a timeout, because he would have known to punt it right away or go for it right away. You wanted to be aggressive, but then decide to be conservative, and you need to talk with another coach in the middle of the drive to decide whether or not to go for it? Am I crazy? Or is this something that you should have thought of, before the drive started? How are you just winging this and doing this all on the fly? How are you only thinking once 4th down happens, oh crap, should we go for it here or punt it away? I don't know. You'd think going into the drive, you'd have something in your mind where if it's 4th and X distance, we're punting. If it's 4th and X distance, we're going for it. If it's past this yard line, we're going for it. Nick Folk's field goal range is at the X yard line. If we're behind this yard line, we're punting, yada, yada, yada. And yet, Glenn had no idea. He had no plan. He had to burn a timeout to give the ball back to the Broncos because he didn't think about any of this until the very last second. This is like a manager in baseball deciding that he wants his guy to try a sacrifice bunt, but only giving the player the signal to do this once it's at 2 strikes in the count because the manager had no idea what he wanted to do when the at-bat started. Aaron Glenn just can't make decisions. He is incapable of making decisions. And when he does make decisions, he flip-flops so often that you can wear as flip-flops on your feet during the summertime when you're on the beach. I'm sure those extra 40 seconds that you gave up by calling a timeout would have really come in handy later on. Too bad you had to burn it on a play where the best case scenario was that the opposition was getting the ball back. Good job, Coach Glenn. You're really nailing this thing right now. So what did we learn from all of this? Don't call a timeout on a punt. It's that simple. If it's the fourth quarter of a close game and you're on the plus side of the 2-minute warning, don't call a timeout on a punt when the field position difference from the original line of scrimmage versus a delay of game would be absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. And if you're a head coach and you're not decisive, you're not going to last long. There are good plans by coaches and there are bad plans by coaches. But at the very least, there are plans. The easiest way to become a one and done and the easiest way to become the worst active coach in football and the only coach of a winless team is to have no plan whatsoever. And based off of everything we've seen thus far, Aaron Glenn truly has no plan to speak of. He has no idea what he's doing. Because when all these elements are in play, you can't exactly be surprised when this play backfires. Talk about a dumb decision. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.